Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected, and if so, how did that go? I feel like about half of weddings these days don't have that part, and not because of feared objections, just because it is outdated and weird. Premarital sex is a thing. Divorce is a thing. Weddings cost like over $10,000. If you know reasons to stop a marriage, outside of movies, you need to intervene at the engagement or earlier, not during the ceremony. That said, one of my wife's college roommates canceled a wedding like a day or 2 days beforehand right after graduating college, after being in a long-distance relationship with some guy for a year or so. Her family was quite well off and she was dating a guy who lavished gifts and expensive dates on her whenever they were together, said he ran his own company, just bought a them fancy house, etc. It turns out he was just super in debt, working a near minimum wage job and maxing out credit cards taken out fraudulently. He had a fake web page with other employees for his company that he set up for the sole purpose of keeping up the front. The house was only bought from grossly lying about income, pre-2007 housing crisis, on the mortgage application, and he was drowning in debt. The almost bride's father got bad vibes about the guy. A few things didn't add up, like he had this fancy house but couldn't afford any furniture, and he hired a PI who quickly uncovered the deception. And she didn't break up cause he wasn't rich, she broke up because he spent tons of effort to lie about everything and was completely conning her and just trying to get her roped into joint ownership of his debt via marriage that he expected the family to pay off. My husband's first marriage. The brother of the bride stood up and said to my husband, "Say no, you can still be happy." They went through with the marriage, wound up divorcing with a messy breakup. Brother-in-law is still best friends with my husband. As far as he's concerned, he gained a brother and lost a sister and is better off for it, and he never lets him forget the fact that he was right and he should have bailed lol. The wedding was at the bride's house. They had thought out almost every detail, except one. When the officiant got to the "speak now or forever hold your peace" part, the cuckoo clock expressed his opinion. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It was a full 15 minutes before the ceremony could continue without everyone busting out laughing. I wasn't there, so this is a second-hand story, and took place shortly after the wedding, but at the reception, no one could find the groom, until they found him out in the limo having sex with one of the bridesmaids. The bride went back into the reception, stopped the band, took the microphone and told everyone there what just happened, naming the bridesmaid, and said the wedding would be annulled and all gifts would be returned. She totally took charge of the situation, but damn. Attended a wedding where the minister said something along the lines of, "If anyone here objects to this marriage, you can keep your mouth shut. Today is not about you." My auntie's fiancé was already married. Lady stood up waving marriage cert, so wedding didn't go ahead. The reception was on a long boat, so we still went to that. The fiancé went back to home country to sort it out and never came back. Not a wedding, but at a funeral someone objected the death. At my uncle's funeral, his ex-wife and a local church cult leader tried to raise him from the dead. We were all sitting there like normal people at a normal funeral, and she walks up to the casket and starts yelling, "James Lester, raise up." I didn't know she was there, or I would have prepared myself for shenanigans. Also, I didn't know my uncle's middle name was Lester, so please imagine the confusion. So she and the cult leader are literally yelling at my uncle's body. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself. They were escorted out. I've actually never told this story because it makes my family look insane. I was at a small ceremony indoors, maybe 30 people tops listening. When the minister asked for any objections, a picture of the bride's dead grandmother that was hanging on the wall fell to the ground with a loud thump. We looked at each other, but the minister finished anyway. Divorced within a year. This was in America, and the wedding was in a Buddhist temple. Parents of the groom stood up and objected because they didn't believe the bride was of the same class. They spoke in another language, so most of the English-speaking guests didn't know they were objecting. My husband was the best man, and those closest to the couple knew this might happen. The Buddhist priest said he would handle it if the parents tried anything. After the parents spoke for a while, the priest said to the groom, "You've heard what your parents had to say, what do you want to do?" The groom replied, "I want to marry my bride." So the priest asked the parents to leave. At this point, the rest of the guests are cluing in that this was not a nice part of the ceremony, and that the parents were actually objecting. So, as the parents walked out, some of the guests were berating them, saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself," and "How could you do that?" And even though the groom was not happy with his parents, that was very hard for him to hear. That was 30 years ago. The couple is still married. They have 2 beautiful, successful children. After the groom's mom passed away, the groom's father came around and was involved in their lives until he died. I objected. I took giving my sister away literally. I wasn't the brightest 3-year-old. In my cousin's wedding, her friend said, "I object," because she was not invited to the wedding. She was kicked out of the wedding. A woman, in her 20s at the time, objected to her mom marrying my uncle. So she started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him," during the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded and some family on the mom's side lead the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her, my uncle was a lying, lazy cheat. The marriage didn't last. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long, throat clearing, which got everyone laughing. Everyone except for the bride's elderly Italian grandmother, who marched out of her seat and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him in Italian. I went to a wedding where the best man was replaced a week before because he banged the bride. But the wedding still went ahead, just with a different best man. They are divorced now. I used to make wedding videos. Did one at an outdoor wedding spot high on one side of a valley. It had rained earlier in the day, but the storms had cleared and the wedding could continue. During the vows I don't touch the camera, just step back and let it run. So I'm spaced out waiting for the vows to finish and notice a radio tower far across the valley. Suddenly lightning hits the radio tower. I had enough time to think, boy, when the thunder gets here it'll probably loud. I also had enough time to clue in that the minister was saying, if anyone objects to this union let him speak now or forever. Keblum. Total silence in the venue. Preacher takes a second to look around and make sure everybody is alright, on one has been smote. Well, that's never happened before. As far as I know they're still married, that was 10 years or more ago. I was at one where the groom thanked the bride's ex for dying as his loss was my gain. Didn't help the sons of his bride and ex were in attendance. Holy crap. Please tell me she divorced him. He's actually dead now, so perhaps it wasn't really his gain the way she seems to get rid of her husband. Not quite the question as asked, but too funny to not share. Priest, any objections? Father of the bride, lets out the hardest, loudest, most complex-sounding sneeze I've ever heard in my life, completely with involuntarily saying, achoo. Mother of the bride, hammered on champagne, for fudge's sake, Jerry. It took a good 5 minutes for everyone to regain their composure. I had a friend who was a minister, and the subject came up if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was a couple where the lead up to the wedding the couple was obviously in love. The bride-to-be was very smiley and happy. Day of the wedding she's stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this and he asks if she is okay. I'm fine. Right before the service he asks again. I'm fine. He gets to the question, does anyone object to this union? The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride's spot and says, you're screwing him, you marry him. And then stormed out of the church. I had a friend who was a minister, and the subject came up if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was a couple where the lead up to the wedding the couple was obviously in love. The bride-to-be was very smiley and happy. Day of the wedding she's stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this and he asks if she is okay. I'm fine. Right before the service he asks again. I'm fine. He gets to the question, does anyone object to this union? The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride's spot and says, you're screwing him, you marry him. And then stormed out of the church. I don't know if it's a UK thing or even just a one specific church thing, but I was told by the priest in a rehearsal that if someone objects, even as a joke, the priest is required to pause the ceremony and talk to the objector alone to discuss their concerns and decide if they have a valid objection. Like it's not a fun jokey moment, it's a real legal part of the ceremony. He also said it used to be custom that if you raised an invalid objection you then had to pay for the wedding. At his rehearsal dinner a coworker's mother toast included that his soon-to-be wife was a damn dirty woman who wasn't good enough for her son. Folks not happy. Video ended so didn't see the whole thing. At wedding which I attended his mom started to say something at the speak now part but was silenced by her daughter. Mom left and didn't see the rest of the ceremony. Everything about that poor guy was drama. Oldie but a goodie, this happened back in the 70s, this was shared to me by the guy who married my parents. It went something like this. Does anyone object to this union? Ido. That's my husband. So they paused the wedding, the bride, groom and the woman objecting went into a small room. The woman who objected provided documentation showing the groom was still legally her husband. Apparently the couple had started divorce proceedings some time earlier but never finished. The wedding was cancelled and everyone sent home. Kind of. My uncle was getting married. Small, just a handful of family and a minister. I was videotaping. My grandmother was not into it at all. With each line spoken by the minister, she had a cutting, sarcastic response. I could not believe it. It was so unlike her. When that part came up, she said, "I object." But does it really matter? They are going to do it anyway. The minister just ignored her and proceeded, business as usual. They were divorced within a year. Wish I had a copy.